Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to round 4 coverage of my games from the Golden State Open. In round 4, my opponent was rated 1898, yet another higher rated opponent, and my rating for the tournament was 1850. And at the beginning of round 4, I was feeling pretty good. I had a win in round 2, I had a bye in round 3, I had a decent night's sleep, and round 4 was played on Sunday morning, so I was feeling pretty optimistic at the start of the game. My opponent went d4. I went knight f6. I went c4. I went e6, hoping to play the Nimzo Indian, and he played knight f3, avoiding the Nimzo Indian. Now there's 4 main replies here that black can play. Maybe the most common move here is really just d5 going into the queen's gambit declined, but I've never played the queen's gambit declined. I normally play the Slav defense if I'm going to play with d5, so I'm not so familiar with that. Another line is bishop to b4 check, the Bogo Indian, and I've never played that either. The way I've always played this is either with c5, going for a Benoni setup, or with b6, going for the Queen's Indian. And I think the Queen's Indian of those two choices is the more solid. c5, the Benoni, is interesting. It's interesting partly because the knight on f3 is blocking the f-pawn. So there's some quick attacks against the Benoni with the early f4, which are ruled out by this particular move order, so you can go into a Benoni. White still gets a pretty good position, but black gets counterattacking chances, so it's interesting to play. But for tournaments, I usually go with the Queen's Indian with the b6. But I was a little thrown off at this point just because in most of my recent games, people have always been playing knight to c3 and allowing the Nimzo Indian. So I wasn't really prepared to play the Queen's Indian defense. I was just playing it because it's the one that I have the most experience with, but I haven't played it in quite a while. And then my opponent went knight c3 here, which further threw me off. The main move in the Queen's Indian at this point is g3. And the main line, which is about all I know of the Queen's Indian, goes something like this. I just want to point it out because I think it's interesting. Not bishop b7, I guess that was the old main line, but bishop to a6, poking this pawn. And white usually defends with b3, and then bishop to b4 check. And white usually blocks with the bishop. He can't play knight c3, and I guess he doesn't really want to play knight to d2. And then black isn't looking to trade the bishop, but just drops the bishop back to e7. So I just think that's a funny sequence. And this bishop might eventually come back to b7 as well. But, well, I guess black is arguing that the bishop here is not particularly well placed. It's blocking the queen's view of the center, with the pawn to b3, the bishop naturally would go to the b2 square. So it'll take some maneuvering. It'll take some time for white to get back, get his pieces sorted out, I guess, is the point. Anyway, he didn't go that way. He went knight c3, and I was sort of completely on my own at this point and moved forward, just trying to figure things out. And eventually I went with bishop b7, just going back to something like the old main line of the Queen's Indian. And it turns out that bishop b7 and the other option here was bishop b4, the two main moves. I didn't really think about bishop b4, but this is interesting. This is a way of getting back into a Nimzo Indian where you've played b6, which is sometimes a move you want to play in the Nimzo Indian, but usually I play the Nimzo Indian with c5 rather than b6. So it would still be a little bit unfamiliar with me, but something I could have thought of. But I played bishop b7. That was those are equally popular, I guess, in the database, and seems to be fine. And then my opponent played queen c2 here, which is kind of unusual. The way that normally goes from this point after bishop b7, white would typically follow up with a3, then black goes d5. The idea is kind of to prepare d5 so you're able to take back with the piece there and open up this diagonal for the bishop. That's I guess the intent of this move order. So he takes, knight takes, and then queen c2, and that's the typical position. So he's kind of just moving the queen out a bit early, queen to c2. I don't think it's a bad move, but it's just not particularly common. I went with d5 anyway. I'm set up to play d5. And he went with bishop to f4. Pretty interesting play. And this is actually not in the opening book. We're already in a rare line, and the only move in the opening book at this point was bishop to g5. But bishop f4, it makes sense. It's looking at this diagonal, and maybe the knight is going to hop in here to b5 and coordinate with an attack on c7. So I went ahead and played c6 to stop that. This may look a bit funny with these pawns blocking my bishop, but in fact, this is not bad for black. This position can open up, this diagonal can open up pretty quickly. This pawn can get exchanged off, and the c pawn can push forward. So nothing has really gone wrong. This is all pretty normal. Let's see, he went e3, and now I went bishop b4. This is the first kind of slight mistake that the chess engine questions in my play. It really prefers to move bishop d6. And after the way the game went, I guess I have to agree with that. Maybe we'll return to this idea. But it seems like this piece on f4, the bishop outside the pawn chain, is kind of an annoying piece, and it makes sense just to trade it off. Anyway, that's not what I played. I played bishop to b4, pinning the knight, and he went bishop d3, just developing, and I took. As soon as the bishop moves, it's often a good idea to take, to force the bishop to move again. You certainly don't want to take, I can't say certainly, you very often don't want to take until the bishop is moved, because you should at least get a little bit of a tempo for that exchange. You are giving up the center when you play that move, or you have one fewer pawns in the center than your opponent now, but you want to play that as black because you are opening up some lines for your bishop. So it's a trade-off, and you want to at least try and gain a tempo by taking after he's moved his bishop, force it to move again. Let's see. In this position, I played queen e7. The chess engine doesn't quite approve of this plan. Let's. I'll go forward a couple moves, and we'll show what happened. The position the chess engine doesn't like. I went knight bd7. That was my idea of going queen e7, was so I could develop my knight. The chess engine doesn't like this because it wants white to play e4 here. And when you look at this position, I can see the point. I think the chess engine is right here. White's very comfortable. White has a lot of space in the center. And there are some latent threats here. The bishop might come to g5 and then threaten the pawn push with e5, winning this pin knight. And my queen doesn't have a whole lot of squares to go to avoid the pin. So yeah, it seems like white is getting a little pressure with that move. In fact, the engine is recommending playing h6 here just to avoid the possibility of a future pin. So that's why the chess engine doesn't particularly like the way I played here. Instead of knight bd7, what it was recommending was just castling immediately, and the idea is that after I castle, if white then plays e4 to strike in the center with c5 counterattack. So interesting play from the chess engine. I didn't really think of that, and my opponent didn't think of the e4 move here, but I'm glad he didn't play it, because normally, and part of the reason for the queen here and the knight here is you want to try and get in the move e4 sometimes to open up lines again, or open up the center at the right time. And with his bishop here and with his knight here, I can't ever really get that in. And in fact, after e4 here, I still can't play e5. You normally want to meet e4 with e5, and he's just got control of that square. So that's why, going back to that earlier position, instead of playing bishop b4, it probably was better to play bishop d6 and just get rid of that piece and get rid of that pressure, or that extra piece that's looking at the e5 square, so that you have the option of playing e5 at some point in the future. Anyway, the game continued from here. I went knight bd7. He didn't play e4. He played the move rook f to d1. And I came up with what I thought was an interesting plan here. Notice I've gotten all of my pieces off of the back rank, and I can actually castle to either side. And the other point I was looking at was I was looking at ways to harass this bishop, which is locked over here on the king side, can't easily retreat back to the queen side. So I wanted to play the move knight h5, and I did play it, but I had to calculate this sequence out before playing it. And yeah, I looked at this later with the chess engine, and the chess engine, it doesn't particularly approve of knight h5, but the following moves it thinks are the best moves for both sides. So this is not a forced sequence, but both sides are playing best moves here. So he went bishop g5. He doesn't want to give up the bishop for, he wants to get some compensation if he gives up the bishop pair. So he's provoking f6, which I play. He drops back, and then I go ahead and play g4. I'm creating pawn weaknesses on the king side, but you'll see my plan here. After he drops the bishop back, I take, he takes, and I castle queen side. So I don't mind these weaknesses over here on the king side because my intent is to turn this into a king side attack. And like I said, the chess engine doesn't particularly approve. It thinks white is better here, but not a whole lot better. And I think in practical terms, this gives black some interesting play and some interesting counter chances. So I would still play this way in the future in similar circumstances. But well, anyway, he doesn't sit around waiting to be attacked. He counterattacks here. This is a good move. Queen b3, looking at the e pawn, and it's kind of annoying to have to defend that pawn. I decided to take off this knight here first on c3, and then worry about how to defend that. I was thinking getting rid of that knight would make it more difficult for him to advance his center pawns. And he took back with the queen, which I was glad to see because it took the pressure off the e-pawn and left me free to place my pieces the way I wanted to. But it does, I mean, it has some point. The queen here looking at the king, you know, there's some idea of bishop to b5, for example, taking advantage of the pin, that kind of thing. So I do have to be a little bit cautious. But objectively, or according to the chess engine, I should say, it would be better just to take with the pawn, keep up this pressure, and I might have to play a defensive move like rook d to e8, which I wasn't really looking forward to playing because I'd rather have that rook on this open e-file. But anyway, this is still an okay position, I guess. But he took with the queen, and actually the chess engine starts to think black is okay in this position. Let's see, I went king b8, he went b4, so he's going to get his attack going as well. And I go with e5. I wasn't yet ready, you know, I wanted to play h5 at the right moment. I wasn't yet ready to play it. One problem is if I play, say, h5 and g4, he can just put his knight on h4 and everything is blocked up. So I would kind of like to get rid of that knight and then push the pawns forward, and I can probably then do it in a way to open up some lines on the king side. So that's the point of this e5 move, which is I can get a knight to e5 and chase his knight away or trade it. And so that's what happened. He takes and I take. And then he didn't want to take my knight, and he didn't want to let my knight take his bishop. So he dropped his bishop back to e2. And now I felt like I was all set, and I played the move h5. And I'd been doing a lot of heavy thinking, so I took a break at this point. You know, I often bring a snack with me to these tournaments. So I went out and ate a snack and then came back, and I found, unfortunately, when I came back, that he had played a good move here. So here's a tactics quiz for you. It's white's turn to move. See if you can find the best move for white, and your hint is that this h5 move was a blunder. Okay, and my opponent found this move over the board. So yeah, if you want time to think about it, pause the video here. I'm going to give the answer away. He played the nice move, rook takes d8 check. Yeah, it's a forcing move that disrupts my defenses. My queen is needed to defend the knight. You know, his queen and his knight are both looking at the e5 square. So if I take the rook with my queen, then he'll win a pawn on e5. But if I take with the rook, which is what I did in the game, then I lose the pawn on h5. Knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes h5. So anyway, and I'm just down a pawn here. The funny thing is that before making the h5 move, I had checked. I had done my blunder check, and I had noticed this particular tactic. He can take there and unleash the bishop on the h5 pawn. He had just moved the bishop to e2, but I was aware of that idea, and but I said it's okay because because it's defended. So my calculation was just a little too shallow there. I didn't take into account this disruptive check, the forcing moves. Now always got to check those forcing moves from your opponent. Anyway, so that's how the game went. Let's see, the chess engine, by the way, thinks that instead of h5, I could have played rook to c8, which is, you know, it's the kind of move you hate to play, giving up the d file, but it eliminates that exchange with check. And then it wants to play like this: knight takes, queen takes, pawn takes. and rates this position as only slightly better for white, or maybe about even. So, you know, I would have trouble. I think I should be able to hold this position. You know, this F pawn, I mean, this E pawn is a bit weak. It's isolated, but I think I should be able to hold this position. If I was going for a draw, you know, I would really rather play with the queens on and play for a win. But anyway, H5 was just a blunder. Let's see. So he took, I took, and he took the knight. And once again, the chess engine wants to go to the endgame. Even a pawn down, it thinks my chances are best in the endgame. But I want to keep the queens on. It's often a good rule if you're down to keep the material on, particularly the pieces, and try and trade off the pawns and get some kind of drawn endgame. Whereas if you're up in material, you want to keep the pawns on and trade off the pieces. That's a good general rule. Let's see. He played bishop takes h5, and I played rook to h8. I think even though I'm down a pawn, I think I do have still some counterplay. I mean, it's not only that I'm down a pawn, also my remaining pawns are kind of weak. So I am definitely worse here. But, well, there is an open H file. And so I can generate some threats and maybe get some counterplay here. Now, he played bishop back to e2, which was an interesting response, leaving the open H file. But I think a good choice. If he tries to block the H file with a move like g4, there's a danger this bishop could get out of play. After a move like g4. After g4 is played, this bishop has nowhere to go. You know, I just need to control these squares that the bishop might go to. And I can, you know, control them with my queen and rook. And then maybe I can push forward on the center, or queen side more likely, and get some play over there. And his bishop would just be out of play. If I get my bishop into the game and his bishop isn't playing, that could turn things around. So he played bishop e2. And at first I thought this was a blunder. Can't I just bring my queen over here and mate on the back rank? But, well, I calculated this out, and there's some a few tricks that white has here, including taking this pawn with check as soon as I move my queen. And then the second trick is that, well, notice his queen is defending the rook. And so if I bring my queen over here, he can push the f-pawn forward. I deliver the check. The king can step out of the way, and his rook is defended, so my queen is hanging. Have to move it again, and this pawn on e5 is hanging as well. So it just doesn't quite work out for me. I played king to a8 to at least get away from the checks. He went bishop to d3, and getting his bishop to a better square. I went rook back to f8, taking a look at a different target. I didn't see any way to make progress on the h file, so I'm taking a look at the f file. He went bishop to e4, I went queen to f6, and he went f3, so that kind of takes care of the f file, though it did leave a weak g pawn here. Let's see. I went queen to d6 here. It's not so easy to attack that g pawn, but if he ever moves the bishop, maybe I can push that pawn forward and attack his g pawn over there. Let's see. He played rook to c1, piling up on my c pawn. I had to come over and defend. And now we're on move 28 here, and he's a bit low on time. You have to make the time control by move 40. He had an hour and 40 for the first 40 moves. So he repeated some moves here. Let's just step forward through the repetitions here. And then eventually played a3 to break it. And he wasn't doing that because he wanted to draw. He was just trying to get closer to the time control. But we're still just to move 32 here. He's still got 8 moves to make the time control. See, I brought my king closer to the center, undoing what I'd done before, but I'd sort of given up on the h file at this point. Let's see, he went bishop back to c2, and I pushed forward with c5. And I knew this would lead to complications, but that's kind of what I was going for. I had more time on the clock than he did, so I was trying to take advantage of his time trouble a little bit and make things more complicated. I think this should probably lose. But this is the idea I had. He played rook d1, I went bishop d5, hitting his queen. And, I was hoping to buy myself some time to actually take the pawn. I was tired of defending that backward c pawn. That was the other point of doing this, is to get rid of that weakness. And I was hoping to trade it off against the b pawn here. But he prevented that with queen to d3. Interestingly enough, well, probably unsurprisingly, there was a better move. The chess engine finds queen b2, and in fact, seems there's no way to save the bishop anymore. I was sort of forgetting there's actually two pins. The bishop is pinned against the queen, but after the queen moves out of the way, the rook is loose as well. So it's difficult to unwind from this position, more so than I realized. If there was one square I could go to with the queen that would defend the bishop and the rook, then it might be okay. Well, if he doesn't put immediate pressure on the bishop, I guess I can drop my queen back and defend the rook, and that would be okay. But when he played queen to d3, it gets tricky. Let's see. But anyway, the best line for the chess engine, from the chess engine, is to actually give up the piece and go for this line. Take a pawn. Let's see, bishop b3. Take another pawn. Queen goes to a1, and then queen to c6. Queen takes e5, check. Drop the queen back. Trade. Take the bishop, and then b5. And oddly enough, this position is not entirely clear. I mean, just counting the material, white is a clear piece up. We have 4 pawns to 4 pawns, and he's got an extra bishop. But my pawns are more advanced, and they might be hard to stop. This configuration here on the queen side might be pretty difficult for him to deal with. So there's still chances here. It doesn't give a flat-out win for white in this position. But anyway, it gives that as a best line for both sides. Let's see, queen d3. This keeps the pressure on my bishop, so it's not a bad move, but it allows me to play c4. I can get away from that exchange and get a passed pawn here. So I've actually gained something, I think, out of this. He goes queen g6. I traded, and I didn't see any way to avoid the trade, and then I brought my king to c7. So now my rook is protected, the bishop is unpinned, and we're near the time control. Let's go ahead and get to move 40. He played king f2. I played b5, holding on to my pawn. He went bishop to f5. I went rook d6. He went bishop c2. I went king c6. So here we made move 40, and we can breathe a sigh of relief, I guess, and stop to think about it. Now we get an extra 30 minutes on the clock, and but that 30 minutes has to last for the rest of the game. so there's still time pressure, is still going to be an element, and it's a complicated endgame. White has the better of it, but it's not necessarily a clear win at this point, and not easy to evaluate with the chess engine. The engine will give you an advantage to white. It'll say white's got an advantage here, but unless the evaluation rises to a number that indicates it sees a way for white to queen a pawn, it may just be some kind of a stalemate that it's not recognizing, a side where the kind of position where neither side can really make progress. Anyway, white went with a4 here. He went with a6. He went a5. This, I think, is a good idea. He keeps the pawns on. At first, I thought he was going to trade and open up the a file, but well, he's got the more material, and when you have more material in the endgame, you want to keep the pawns and trade the pieces. That's the general rule. Whereas my strategy would be to trade off pawns and keep the pieces. If I can get rid of enough pawns, I can find some drawn endgame perhaps. Let's see. He played. Oh, I played king c7. I'd kind of run out of ideas here, and I sort of moving my king around. He went rook h1, and I was a little bit worried at first, but I realized, well, he gave up the d file here, so now I have some threats as well. So I played bishop e6, threatening to come in here and check and win the bishop. So he came back. He spotted that one. I went back. Let's see. And now he finally pushed forward. The chess engine, by the way, thought he should have started pushing those pawns immediately instead of doing that rook adventure, which makes sense. Let's see. He pushed with g4 first. I go back with king c6. He went to g3. So he's moving his g-pawns forward one at a time, but he's preparing to push the f-pawn. I go rook f6, and he brings his bishop in front of the f-pawn to block my rook. That's a nice move, actually. I bring my rook back, and let's see, played rook d2. I had some kind of preparation move. I wasn't sure what. I mean, this pawn, I guess he's coordinating on the c2 square to make sure I can never push that pawn forward. Now if I push it forward, he gets his rook in front of it, and I have trouble defending it. So it's a way of freezing that pawn, I guess. Let's see, I played king back to c7, and now he pushes with f4. So we get these exchanges. Let's see, I took with the e-pawn, Took with the G pawn. I took with the G pawn. And now he played a move that was a little bit surprising. He played E4. And suddenly the chess engine's evaluation changes and actually thinks this is a clear draw. Thinks I should just play my bishop back to B7, which makes sense, you know, defending the base of this pawn chain against his bishop. His bishop is on the same color complex as those pawns. They're both on light squares, so I do have to be very careful about my losing those pawns. And yeah, thinks this is a draw, interestingly enough. Let's see. What the chess engine would play would be just a take, and that's what I would play too. It just makes sense to keep those pawns together. They're more of a threat. I did want to point out, though, that because I have this protected passed pawn, if we were to suddenly get rid of all the pieces, this is probably a draw. I can get my king over here in time to stop these pawns from coming forward, and he can get his king over here in time to stop my pawn, but neither side can make progress after that. He can't come around in front of these pawns to help his pawns pass because I will get a queen, and same thing is true for me. I can't help my pawn because I need my king over here to stop his pawns. So we're at least in the situation where the king and pawn endgame is a draw. So that gives me some hope here. Let's see. He played E4, and I have the same idea, the same considerations apply here. This is probably a drawn king and pawn endgame if we just got rid of the pieces. Let's see. I went bishop E6 here, and I don't want to take his bishop and straighten out those pawns, but I thought maybe I could induce him to take my bishop, but he didn't. He kept everything on. Let's see, he went rook c2. I think that was part of his idea all along, just putting his rook in front of this pawn so I can never advance it. And then I played king to d7. I want to get my king over here in front of his pawns. He went to king to f3. He's going to round up this pawn. This was sort of a delayed exchange, but I never had a way to save that pawn. And now I tried to activate my rook. But I think I had the wrong idea here because after a couple of moves, the evaluation changes. Let's see, I played this check, he took the pawn, and I played my rook to b3. And right here is where the evaluation changes, and now white is winning. So this rook b3 idea, I mean, I was just thinking I could take these pawns and I would have two pawns over here against his two pawns. But his two pawns are more dangerous than mine. He's got mine under better control. And he played a very good move here. He played g5. And that really forced me to think. I can't afford. I was able to calculate that I can't afford to take that pawn. And I just brought my king over. And he played his rook over to h2, bring it over here to help his pawns advance. I went ahead and traded bishops at this point. He took. And then I played c3, started to push my pawn. He went to king e5. I went rook b2. Now if he takes my rook, of course, I'm going to queen and probably win, but he doesn't have to take. He goes rook h7 check, and I don't want his rook coming over here behind my pawn, so I played king d8. And now we're in the situation where white is winning. If you put this on a computer, it'll give white a value of plus 20 is what I was reading, and if you let it run longer, it'll probably continue to rise until it sees the mate at the end. But this is not so easy to figure out on your own in a real game. And he was out of time, basically. He's down to about a minute on the clock and pretty much just playing on the delay. And with this delay time control, you don't ever get more time. It's not like you can make a bunch of quick moves and your time will go up. It just goes nowhere but down. So he just gave some checks here. Rook h8 check, king d7, rook h7 check, king d8, rook h8 check, and offered a draw, or I offered a draw. We agreed to a draw at this point. It's clear that he was just repeating moves, and he took it. He said, he'd already lost the game on time in this tournament, and he didn't want to lose any more that way. So I guess this is an illustration of why time management is important, because if he'd had enough time, he could probably figure out a way to stop my pawn and queen his pawns. It's still tricky. I think it would take more than just a minute to figure it out and make sure you'd got it correct. So definitely he was not taking any chances. And if you miscalculate, it's not like he has a safe move he can play. If you miscalculate, then you lose. So so you have to play precisely in these positions. And he decided the draw was the better course rather than risking losing. So interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And a long game. and I was pretty tired. So, and unfortunately, this was the one day I had two games the same day, so I had to play another game, my round 5 game at 6 o'clock. So stay tuned, and I will be showing you that one next. See you then.